Many elements of Catholic social teaching are much more at home with a Democratic Party platform. Others are much more at home with the Republican.
Where do you see your role or the role of a bishop?
I'm not a journalist. I'm not an entertainer. I'm not a politician. My job is to articulate Catholic social teaching. Now, go forth.
Do you think that America is a Christian nation? Is that an accurate description? Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Adam O'Neill. Our guest today is Bishop Robert Barron, the Bishop of the Diocese of Winona-Rochester and the founder of Word on Fire Catholic Ministries. He's the creator and host of the Catholicism documentary series and a frequent commentator on faith, culture, and theology. Bishop Barron, thank you for being here.
Adam, thank you. Thanks for having me.
You were ordained, I think, in 1986.
Yeah.
What's changed in the last 40 years when you think about the landscape of being a priest in America?
That's a big question. A lot. When I was ordained in 1986, so John Paul II is Pope, but it was kind of in his relatively early years as Pope. One change is when I was going through seminary, it was still very much the church of the 1970s. So Catholic liberalism was very much in vogue. By the end of John Paul's time, so now into the late 90s, early aughts, his vision had kind of, come to the fore. Mm-hmm. And so I would say 1970s era liberalism had kind of given way to his more kind of, evangelically confident vision. That would be a major change. In terms of Catholics in America, when I was ordained, so my parents' generation is still around, they were the kind of greatest generation Catholics, most churchgoers. My early years as a priest, I remember, weekend masses filled with my parents' generation. And then we saw the great disaffiliation kicking in. Mm-hmm. So we've been tracking that for the last maybe 25 years of the numbers steadily going down. So that was a mark in the years of my priesthood. That's stabilizing, even going up a bit now. You have the Francis papacy comes in there, which also changes the tenor in a way. The John Paul and Benedict papacy are kind of the same ideological place, and then Francis represents a shift. But it's an interesting question because it's helping me as I think it through. It was still the church of my parents in a way that was present when I was newly ordained. That's gone. That's given way. And then the long disaffiliation may be reversing itself now is a mark of our time.
You also grew up in the Chicago area.
Yeah.
How did that shape your understanding of the world, whether it's faith or culture or what it means to be American? Like what imprint did that have on you? What does being from Chicago mean?
Yeah, probably a lot. My father's family was very involved in Democratic politics. So going back now into we're talking about the 30s, 40s, 50s. Mayor Richard J. Daley, so the Mayor Daley from the 50s and 60s and 70s, was a great hero of my father. And so a kind of a confident, urban, Catholic, democratic sensibility. That would have been what I came of age with. My earliest political memories are my father booing Richard Nixon, like at the 1972 Republican convention. We're watching it. I barely knew what was going on. So I came out of a very strong, confident Chicago Democratic thing. In terms of the church, too, there was kind of a confidence in the Chicago church. Big, vibrant, growing, huge number of seminarians and priests. My parents' generation was certainly conditioned by that, and I think I would have caught a lot of that too. I attended Mundelein Seminary, one of the great seminaries in the country. I ended up teaching there, and then eventually I was rector of it. I was head of it. And Mundelein, named for the man, Cardinal Mundelein, who was a great, confident churchman, saw the congruence between the American experiment and Catholicism. So I think that kind of, city of big shoulders, confident, Democratic Party, vibrant Catholic church, that's the culture that, produced my parents, and I'd say that I was conditioned by in my early years. Now, a lot of that began to break apart and fade away, right, in the course of my lifetime. But I think that vibrant Catholic culture was still, part of the Chicago thing.
There's also another somewhat well-known Catholic from the Chicago area, Pope Leo, right? A few years older than you, but you all sort of grew up similar generation.
Yeah.
Were you shocked when he was chosen?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when talking to people who know much more about the Vatican than I do, they told me never going to be American, right? And now he's sort of, like you said, he's a unique American, right? He spent most of his adult life in Latin America or Rome. But why did it shock you? Just was it the bias that you would have among like kind of an international church like that, or what was so surprising?
Well, I was a commentator for both Francis' election in 2013 and then Leo's in last year. My conclusion is never listen to pundits on TV. We don't know what we're talking about because no one predicted Francis in 2013. No one. Everyone said, "Oh no, Bergoglio, he's too old," and we all said, "No way." And then with Leo, every one of us, including me, we all said, "Well, it'll never be an American." So we were wrong again. Don't listen to us. I go back to Cardinal George, who was the Archbishop of Chicago before Cardinal Cupich, and he was kind of a hero to me. And he always said, until America goes into cultural and political decline, there won't be an American pope because the world will not want to give us.
Well, bad news, I guess.
Right. Well,
oh, no.
No, I mean, I think he meant until we become like a third world or third rate power.
Sure.
Because, if we run the world politically, economically, militarily, culturally, they're not going to give us the church too. So that was the standard wisdom, and I certainly bought it. I think the fact that Prevost was a very unusual American, as they said somewhat condescendingly, the least American of the Americans, I think that helped him. I think the fact, too, that he spoke English and Spanish so well, that brings a lot of the world into the conversation. You got those two languages.
When he was first chosen, the name Leo, everyone thought about the 13th, which was well over a century ago, but still is a pope that's talked about quite a bit. And he's remembered for trying to bring the church into modernity technologically with the industrialization and sort of the balance between unfettered capitalism and Marxism and where does the church fit in there? What you've seen so far from Leo, where is he trying to make his statements, and what are the big cultural, political, economic, spiritual questions? Like where all those things intersect? What lessons does he want to impart when it comes to all of those things?
I think we're still waiting and seeing. It's only been a year. What I noticed so far is the bridge building. I think the general congregations, that were held prior to the conclave, and I've talked to a lot of people involved in those, that they knew they needed a bridge builder. They knew the church was in a kind of civil war, and after the Francis years, there was a lot of kind of tension, and they wanted someone who could bridge the gap. And I think they saw him as that kind of reconciler, and so a lot of these gestures, and they're not just superficial, but toward the more conservative Catholic mentality in terms of the liturgy and even what he wears and how he speaks, and then also his ongoing reverence for the synodal process. I think that's an attempt to say yes to the conservatives, yes to more progressives. I think he's trying to be a bridge figure. Now, what that will look like exactly, I'm still waiting and seeing. And, we don't have a big paper trail with him. We don't know, he's not written a lot. We don't know what his convictions are. So I think a lot of us are just kind of keeping our eyes open and seeing. Now, the new encyclical coming out about AI, and indeed, many have commented that the choice of Leo was because of AI in a way, just as Leo the 13th was trying to do what you were describing, that AI being one of those great kind of cultural and technological challenges today. So we'll see with that letter.
Should the Pope have a podcast when we think about spreading, instead of this magisterial document that's checked by all the church theologians and translated into 12 languages? Should he just have a podcast?
I think not. To me, the Pope should always speak in a very formal way. I don't like the sort of chatty approach. I don't frankly like papal news conferences on airplanes.
Yeah.
Now, my hero, John Paul II, started that, and then his successors have all followed him. I don't. I think people like me, let's say at lower levels of the church's life, could engage in that kind of more informal conversation. The Pope, to me, should always speak at a very high level of authority. So no, I'd be against papal podcasts and news conferences.
Talk about news conferences, because that was, when we talked about sort of divisions and Francis.
Yeah.
If you go back to John Paul II, he's holding 6 different news conferences in all the languages he speaks to reach out. And the internet can't diffuse things as rapidly as it can now. So that was actually sort of practical, with the French journalists and then the Spanish speakers and everything. But now you have the Pope says something, right? Francis, I think in America, if he's remembered for one statement. It's
Yeah,
who am I to judge, right? And it's still early days for this pope, but when he's critical of something like the war in Iran, or also just war in general, but the war in Iran is the big thing on people's minds, is there a risk of him starting to be perceived as like the anti-Trump pope?
Yeah. No, I do. And I think the Pope should speak at the level of very high authority and about the great ethical, moral, and spiritual values that ought to be informing all of our decisions. But I do think it gets a bit more problematic if a Pope gets into the weeds and details of particular issues like that. I'd prefer if he would articulate the great principles that govern Catholic thinking on these matters.
But in some sense, he kind of is doing that, and then
and fair
people
enough.
just write it up, and because he'll say something against war
Right.
the day after the war starts, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's what you're talking about."
Right.
That's a reason, and that's a reasonable thing to do, I think.
Sure, and of course, Cardinal George again. This is back when the Iraq War was going on, and John Paul II was saying at the very end of his papacy was saying all these negative things about let's avoid the war and the war is terrible, and a conservative Catholic wrote to Cardinal George in Chicago and said, I am so annoyed at this Pope, and doesn't he know what's going on, and this is so irresponsible. And the Cardinal wrote back and just said, look, it's the Pope's job. That's what Popes do. They call for peace.
Right.
And that's true. So, of course, at that high level of articulation, that's what the Church does. Now, to get into the weeds of just war, and is a particular war, justified, that's a different question.
Yeah, it's difficult because John Paul II's opposition to Iraq is very famous because he generally had a good relationship with George Bush, I think.
Yeah.
But he also opposed the first Gulf War.
Sure, Popes oppose wars.
And that's the thing that I think most Americans that's a war that in hindsight, a lot of people are like, that seemed like a just war. They expelled him. It didn't go on too long. Or they expelled Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. The damage was relatively, if anything, they should have done more to prevent all of the massacres that Saddam would commit later.
Right.
What I'm saying is, what you're saying is, it's not the Pope's job to get in at that level. It's more to evangelize in like a kind of a general sense.
I think so. I think Catholics of goodwill can disagree about some of those prudential judgments. If you say, now, is this particular military action justified or not? I think Catholics of goodwill can disagree about that. All agreeing with the high principles, and then especially a pope. A pope is by his nature is going to be calling for peace. Of course he is, and making sure that moral criteria are brought to bear in all these situations. But I think Catholics of goodwill can disagree about that. And
how do you navigate that as a bishop here in the United States? And in your flock, there are Republicans, Democrats,
sure,
far left, far right. There's a whole mix of people. How do you walk that line of trying to engage in the world as it is and not, because there's a tension between having these very principled 30,000-foot beliefs, but also getting down to where people are living their lives. And where do you see your role or the role of a bishop? Not just the Bishop of Rome, but like just a bishop here in America.
Well, it's to articulate in this political context Catholic social teaching, which famously goes beyond our left-right split.
Right.
Many elements of Catholic social teaching are much more at home with a Democratic Party platform. Others are much more at home with the Republican. Fair enough. As a bishop, that's my job, is to propagate Catholic social teaching. But then, see, again, I articulate the principles of it. But then Vatican II, called the laity to move into the secular order filled with the teaching of Christ and then applying it as they know how to do. So, I'm not a journalist. I'm not an entertainer. I'm not a politician. I'm not a business leader. My job is to articulate Catholic social teaching. Now, go forth, business leaders and journalists, and now apply it in your situation. You know it better than I do. So what precisely should I do? Well, that's your job, I would say. See, sometimes I think people put too much pressure on the bishops. Like, our job is to just settle all these questions, descend into the weeds of every issue. No, we empower the laity, whose proper ambit is the secular order. That's Vatican II's vision. My job is to teach the faith and to articulate the principles of Catholic social teaching. Now, go forth and apply them.
And you're here in Washington, D.C. You came, you said a couple days ago, and you also recently spoke at the Rededicate 250 event on the National Mall. just you and I think Cardinal Dolan, who's now
Yeah.
who's no longer running the New York Archdiocese. But
Right.
why did you want to attend this when it seems like so many people stayed away?
They invited me to come. And I thought to show the deep congruence between a religious conviction and the great American principles. Because indeed, I argued, you can't really talk coherently about democracy without appealing to, as the founding fathers did, all men created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that the rule of law, freedom itself, that they're all predicated finally upon religious foundations. And I cited not just Lincoln and Jefferson, but one of my favorites is Martin Luther King, when he's defending himself in the letter from the Birmingham City Jail. And, why are you opposing these laws? And he said, well, there are just laws and unjust laws. And just laws are those that are grounded in the natural law, and then finally in the eternal law of God. And then he quoted explicitly St. Thomas Aquinas. So I love the fact that King, this great American hero, is citing the greatest Catholic intellectual, Thomas Aquinas, in justifying his nonviolent resistance. So I think the same congruence you see in the founding fathers, in Abraham Lincoln, you see in King. And I wanted to emphasize that. It's not to undermine the anti-establishment clause, by no means. I proudly and happily and enthusiastically endorse it. At the same time, there's the free exercise clause. And the founding fathers struck a balance that's still worth emphasizing and can be struck today. Now, for a variety of reasons, that consensus has kind of fallen apart, and we see ourselves on these opposing sides. I think the genius of the First Amendment is that it found that space, right, between the formal establishment of religion and the free exercise. And I wanted to speak to that compromise in the best sense is still worth celebrating.
And I know you can't control the rest of the lineup, but a lot of people are seeing, the Speaker of the House, the President, the Secretary of War, as he refers to himself, speaking at this event. And the lineup is broadly, I think it's fair to describe as conservative evangelicals, right? Now that you're a Catholic, and you can, I won't attach an adjective, you can pick whatever one you want, but for a lot of, I think a lot of Americans saw that and were kind of like, this doesn't seem right. All these, they may not have as nuanced a take at you, but they're sort of, their gut feeling is like, it's not quite right, or there should be a separation of church and state to see these politicians speaking so openly and so directly about Christianity. And there are people like Mayor Soloveitchik, Rabbi Soloveitchik, who were there. Right. So it wasn't exclusively Christian, but the overwhelming tenor was one of explicit Christianity, and it's with these government officials there. What do you say to people like that who are, maybe they're not assuming bad faith on your behalf by any means, but they just feel like it doesn't sit well with them?
I would say as a whole, if we're not advocating for the formal establishment of religion, we're not advocating for the government to be giving its official sanction to a particular religion, we're within the proper confines of the First Amendment. I would see yesterday as an example of the free exercise of religion.
Sure.
And so, the Speaker of the House, or J.D. Vance is a Catholic, Rubio is a Catholic, the Speaker is an ardent Christian. Of course we can express our faith in the public forum. The trouble, I think, is, now this begins with the jurisprudence of the last roughly 75 years, we so hyper-stressed the Jeffersonian wall of separation that we got ourselves into this situation where someone even praying in a public school, or someone wearing this came up at the religious liberty hearing, someone wearing a COVID mask that says Jesus loves me, that's somehow excluded. Well, I don't think anyone of the founding fathers would have seen that as coherent. I don't think anyone up until mid-20th century would have seen that as a problem. But the last 75 years or so, we've hyper-stressed the wall of separation. I advocate the First Amendment. Stay within the creative tension between the anti-establishment and the free exercise clauses. You're in a good space. And I would say yesterday is the free exercise of religion, and no one's coerced. No one's being told you have to believe a certain way. No one's trying to use the state power to impose Christianity or any other religion on anybody. A gathering of Christians or believers in a public space to express, indeed, the great spiritual principles undergirding our democracy, I think that's a good thing. So that's my general take on it.
Do you think America, not the government, but America as a separate entity, not its government, which is secular, but do you think America is a Christian nation? It's sort of described that way by a lot of the attendees who've said, like, this is about revitalizing. And again, you're not responsible for what
Right.
some person who attended there, but I'm curious, like, your opinion. Do you think that America is a Christian nation? Is that an accurate description?
Well, no, because I think it's taken in a way to imply that Christianity is kind of the established religion
right,
of the
which
country.
is not what I'm asking, but just like
Right. And so if that's what people mean by it, I would say no. If they mean there are principles that are derived from the Judeo-Christian biblical tradition that are essential to our democracy, I would say yeah. So in that sense, yes, it's unavoidable, but not in the sense of any kind of establishment of Christianity or any religion. See, one thing I think is interesting about that is we talk very abstractly about it, but the Founding Fathers knew exactly what an established religion looked like. It's the religion of the country they were trying to break from.
Right.
The fact that one of my heroes, John Henry Newman, mid-19th century, becomes a Catholic in England, he has to resign from his position at Oxford. You had to subscribe to 39 articles of the Anglican religion to have any public position in England. That's an established religion. I'm against that. The Founding Fathers were against that. I don't know anyone advocating for that today. The trouble is that there's been kind of like a bleeding of this idea into any mention of religion in a public context is an establishment of religion. It's not. They knew what that meant, and they were against it, the founders. I'm against it.
Well, there are a lot of terms like populism, which I think have sort of lost their meaning. And one of those phrases, I think, as we think about this, is Christian nationalism.
Right.
And I'm not really, I think you know what it used to mean, but now at this point, it just seems like someone who's Christian, someone who's involved in politics, and I don't like them.
Right.
Or maybe
Right.
some people see
To
positively.
me, it's a completely slippery term. I don't know what it means. I need someone carefully to define what they mean by that. Here's my position. Bracket Christian nationalism. I'm for the First Amendment. I'm for the First Amendment of the Constitution, which I think was ingenious. Madison was a genius, you know, and our democracy rests upon that genius for compromise, which is part of the American spirit. A compromise in the best sense. He found a way to say not establishment, but free exercise. And it protected religion from the state, protected the state from the excesses of religion. It was genius. That's what I'm for. I'm a First Amendment person. So Christian nationalism, I don't even know what that means.
Now, a lot of people will be watching this and they'll say, I can't believe I've seen this in the Washington Post. But, you know, you did not get known on the internet by just going to big legacy media institutions like this. You sort of paved your own way, and you're now very big on YouTube, and also just known as I was talking to someone who's like, oh, yeah, I watched a lot of Bishop Barron's videos when I was in Catholic school, right? We kind of they show them,
Yeah.
and it seems like this seems sort of like an outlier, but in reality, from my understanding, the Catholic Church actually is usually ahead of the curve when it comes to religions and technology. Society-wide, maybe not, right? But when you compare them to other faith groups, do you think that's still the case, or is that sort of a dated perception? Or do you think that you all are able to keep up now as things are moving even faster than they had been just 10, 15 years ago?
Well, when I got started doing this, I felt we were way behind the curve. I thought, Fulton Sheen was this great figure back in the 40s and 50s using radio and TV, but that we had kind of dropped the ball. And I was lamenting that fact, and that's what kind of led me to say, well, maybe I should try to get on the radio, and that was the first move, and then video and television, and then the social media revolution in the mid-aughts happens, and we were just kind of positioned to do that. YouTube came along in 2006. In 2007, I did my first video commenting on a movie, and that was just my instinct was, well, let's use this new medium, and don't do you come to us, but rather we'll go to you. Like we'll move into your space. And I think that was the right instinct, and it worked. It was a complete experiment in the beginning. I had zero idea who would watch anything I was doing. I was told I shouldn't be wearing a Roman collar. I shouldn't be sitting in front of bookshelves. I should be much more, hip and all that. I didn't listen to that. And we did find an audience, And then I think that did inspire lots of other Catholics to get into the social media space. So I thought we were kind of behind the curve on all that. And I just sort of jumped in the pool and experimented with it. And I think we found, success with it.
There's an extent when maybe that can be taken too far. And I was talking to a respected older Catholic intellectual who's written lots of books, met popes, that sort of thing. And he said one thing he worries about is the number of young Catholics who, yes, they go to church on Sunday, but also largely their understanding of their religion is online. Like there's sort of this online Catholicism where there's a lot of polarization and infighting and
right.
very, so when I was preparing for this interview, I was, reading some Catholic publications and I was like, whoa, like I'd forgotten, how intense it's like Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
Now the divides don't map on, there's not like Democrat bishops and Republican bishops, but there are divisions within the church. I mean, is that, what's the danger there when it comes to being like a very online Catholic, let's say?
Well, you have to do it responsibly. And I share a lot of those concerns. I hate a superficial presentation of the faith. I hate the negativity on social media, the scapegoating mobs, the tribalism, this goofy us against them. I've scolded my own audience at different points saying, imagine a non-Catholic coming on a Catholic site and then seeing nothing but this petty, bickering and character assassination. I mean, I hate all that. I'll say this, from the beginning, I did things in a sophisticated way. I mean, so my background is in theology. I've written 30 books of theology. I taught it for 20 years at the highest level. And that's informed all the work I do online. I've been stubbornly refusing to do it in a superficial way. The Catholicism series, which is a documentary that kind of got us on the map, beauty and truth, those were my watchwords. And I wanted to do it in an elevated way. Believe me, along the line, everyone has said to me, oh, no, this is too much, or oh, no, it's too sophisticated, oh, no, they'll never understand that. Nonsense has been my experience. That people have responded precisely to the intellectuality and the aesthetic quality of it. So, I mean, I share a lot of that. I don't like the superficial, whiz-bang presentations of the faith, and I hate the tribalism, liberal conservative Catholics in their little, teams. That's completely counterproductive.
And I know we're kind of winding down here. So I just want to ask one last question.
Yeah.
And I think it's like a sort of a short, trite question, but maybe it's a more profound one or a longer answer. But what do you think is your most radical or fringe belief?
I don't really think it's all that radical. Some people might see it that way. Is I hold to von Balthasar's position. He's my favorite contemporary theologian, Urs von Balthasar, that we may hope that all people will be saved. I don't know it. That's called universalism. If you know and you teach, all people will be saved. It's not my position. It's that we may dare to hope that all people might be saved. And I've articulated that over the years, and I get a lot of flack for it. There are people that really, really, really want a lot of people in hell. And again, hell is a very real possibility. I don't know if all people will be saved, but I think we may dare to hope, based on the cross and resurrection and the work of Christ, that all people will be saved. Maybe that's my most, fringe idea. I don't think it's all that fringy, but
right. Well, it's very profound. It's not like Hawaiian pizza or something like that. So I appreciate that. But Bishop Barron, thanks for coming on Make It Make Sense.
You're welcome. Enjoyed it.